Andy, one of your predecessors today said The Second Machine Age is the best book he has read in a long, long time. And I feel privileged to ask some of the questions that came to my mind when reading your book and writing the foreword here.
Whoever said that needs to read a lot more books.
He's here, Joe. Joe said it, and he sounded very credible. But, you know, a couple of things that I took from it. Progress of digital technology isn't coming to a stop. It's gigantic, and it's still growing. Hardware, software, networks. The change through digitization is positive. Instead of shortages, there will be abundance. Instead of restraint, there will be freedom. Technical progress determines the progress of society. And in the end, yes, there is the saying that there are byproducts, like in the first industrial revolution, there was child labor and there was smog in London. And there are some problems here too, but overall, it's a positive development. Do I get it right?
Yes, we're done here. Thank you very much.
So there we are. And then we see about the Google car, and we see what happened. We will be talking to Siri, and we will be having things at home that enable our mechanical duties to go much faster. When I come to the theoretical underpinning, which I think is very well done, you talk about Moore's Law. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I don't really need to elaborate on Moore's Law, do I? How many of us are familiar with Moore's Law? Which stupid question. I think very few of us are really aware enough of the implications of Moore's Law. And I say that because I was not aware enough of them. There's a wonderful story that brings the point home. And it's a legend about the inventor of the game of chess, who takes his creation to the Emperor of India and shows the Emperor of India the game of chess. And the Emperor is so impressed by this beautiful game that he says, "You can name your own reward." And the inventor says, "Your Majesty, I'm a humble person. All I want is a pile of rice. And we're going to put 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard. We're going to double that. We're going to put 2 on the second square, double that, put 4 on the third square. Off we go. 64 squares. Give me that pile of rice and I'll go home." And the emperor says, "Wow, you really are a humble person. Make it so." Now, we kind of see what's coming, right? If we actually did that experiment, after 64 squares, there would literally be a pile of rice bigger than Mount Everest. It's more rice than has been produced in the history of the world. And in some parts of the story, when the emperor realizes how he's been fooled, he has the inventor beheaded. Now, where that story gets really interesting, Ray Kurzweil made a really interesting point about that story. He said things only get crazy in the second half of the chessboard. So after 32 squares, you've got about 4 billion grains of rice. And that's a lot, but it's no more than you would get from harvesting 1 field. It's a number that we can kind of get our minds around. Nobody's going to get beheaded over that first half of the chessboard. It's only in the second half of the chessboard, when the numbers get crazy and we start talking about quadrillions of grains of rice, and our intuition, our human intuition, doesn't work anymore, doesn't keep up with that constant doubling going on. And the constant doubling is what's going on with Moore's Law. So Eric and I, my co-author, did a stupid calculation when we were writing the book. We said the US government started tracking this new thing called information technology in about 1958. So let's take that as the starting point, and let's take 18 months, a year and a half, as the doubling period for Moore's Law, and let's just see what happens with that. So we did that stupid calculation, and by that calculation, we, humanity, entered the second half of the chessboard with digital progress in about 2006. And for me, that really helps. I don't want to overemphasize that calculation, but for me, it really helps me to understand why we're seeing smartphones and driverless cars and automatic translation and powerful artificial intelligence and this amazing parade of technologies. They've really all appeared since then. I think of them as second half of the chessboard technologies. If you believe that story, there's one really clear implication. As we say in American English, we ain't seen nothing yet. because we're still in the early part of the second half of the chessboard. And as the doubling continues, the amount of innovation, the amount of change, the amount of turbulence we're going to see is not going to decrease. It's going to go like that.
Is it conceptually difficult to think of exponential developments?
Our brains are not wired that way. Our brains are good at linear. 2, 4, 6, okay, 8, 10, 12. 2, 4, 8, 16. Our brains don't work with how big those numbers are going to get. It's why digital progress takes a lot of us by surprise.
Okay. Well, Andy, overall, your book is, as I said, very positive. And as a German, I obviously, after 50 pages, I say theoretically, it's all clear. And I'm convinced of that. But then comes the feeling that we are very often yes-butters, not why-notters. We say, yes, it's conceptually feasible, but is that so good? Is that advantage that we are seeing so good? Do we need to take advantage of all the things that are technically possible? How do you see that?
You mentioned this yes-but philosophy, and since you said it, I'll follow up on it about some European countries, including Germany. The reason I think that it is potentially a pretty serious problem, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what's it going to take to recreate Silicon Valley, to recreate this amazing, not just the size of the high-tech industry in the United States, but the pace of innovation, the amount of amazing companies that come out of it. Why don't we see that all over the world? And it's a really deep question. My favorite answer to it comes from Mark Andreessen, who himself is a really successful innovator. And he says, as he looks around, there are really 4 main ingredients for this kind of really astonishing technology-fueled innovation and business change. And he says they are, first of all, great research universities. They are large amounts of risk-tolerant capital. Some of this stuff is expensive. You need the rule of law. You need contracts and property rights to be well respected and well maintained. And you need a cultural tolerance for failure. And as I look around, as I look at Germany, I certainly see the first 3 of those in abundance, but this tolerance for failure and for falling down and then picking yourself up, my European colleagues and even my students, my younger ones, say that's the main thing that seems to be lacking here. And I think you probably need all 4 of those ingredients. The only one I would add to that list is openness and tolerance to immigrants, to people of very different backgrounds and very different inclinations. Luckily, so far, we still have all 5 of those in the States. Let's hope that doesn't erode.
You allude to the winner-takes-it-all philosophy, which, very often in the technological development is the outcome. Now, I recall when we had at McKinsey debates about that, you could almost say there was a gap between the Americans, who thought this is where the world is going, winner takes it all, and the Europeans who said, wait a minute, that cannot be on. It's the live and let live. And is it unavoidable to go to the winner-takes-it-all society?
I don't know if it's unavoidable or not. We can certainly mitigate it, but I think it is part of the inherent process that's going on these days. And it's a little bit weird. How many of us have taken a basic economics course? Another stupid question, right? Basic economics teaches us that the more competition you have, the more prices level out, the more there's just an equality of outcome. It's the opposite of a winner-take-all situation. So we initially thought that you only get winner-take-all when you have an unfair monopoly, when you've got some kind of capture, when something is wrong. There's another way of thinking about it, which says that the dynamics of digital change and digital innovation tend to favor, because of network effects and network externalities and a lot of other reasons, they tend to favor one great big successful entity instead of a lot of little ones. And we clearly see this with social networking technologies, right? With Google and Twitter and things like that. It goes a lot of strange places in the economy, and winner-take-all dynamics can show up when we're not really expecting them. Here's my favorite demonstration of that. This is audience participation. Will someone please shout out the name of the world's best cello player?
Pablo Casal.
A live cello player. Yo-Yo Ma, right? will someone please shout out the name of the world's third best cello player? It's a little bit more difficult. In a world where we don't have to settle for second best, where technology puts us in touch with the absolute best at a good price, we tend more toward these winner-take-all dynamics. Eric did some research, and he found out that when you look at industries in the United States, the more technology they have, well, he and I did this research together, the more they tend toward winner-take-all dynamics, and the more they tend to pay their CEO. So it does feel like there's a pretty deep change happening in the world that's not necessarily because of unfair monopolies and not necessarily because of any difference in philosophy between, let's say, the Anglo-Saxon approach to capitalism and the European approach to capitalism.
We in Europe wrestle with the fact that, I gave you the example, Julia Roberts gets 20 million for a film, and my son, who happens to be an actor in New York, lives what the average actor gets there, which is about $2,500 a month. Is that fair?
We need to be a little bit careful on that. I don't know how to answer the is it fair question or not, but I came across some evidence recently that I was unprepared for. It turns out before taxes happen, the United States, with these huge CEO salaries in this tech industry and all these billionaires, even with all that, before taxes, the United States is a less unequal society than Germany, than most European countries. It's only after the tax and transfer system happens that we become a much more unequal society. So in answer to your question, this is one way in which I wish the United States were a good deal more European, because the inequality that we have is, I don't think it's essential, and I don't think we need to tolerate it. I think we need to have a lot more concern for the people who are left behind as technology races ahead.
Coming back to that, goes down to the old question, are we making the cake bigger, and then we can distribute it, you can distribute more?
Yeah.
Or are we, as we see very often on the continent, talking about distribution? Say, you know, the bottom shouldn't be too far down, and the top shouldn't be too high up.
We're clearly talking about both, but the central thing that we need to keep in mind is an amazing piece of good news. The pie is getting bigger. There just really is not any controversy about that. There's the old joke that technological progress is the only free lunch that economists believe in. There's nothing that has changed the course of human history and improved human history like technological progress. It's not even close. The problem that we have is a distribution problem, and it's a bad problem right now. I believe it's going to become a lot worse problem within a generation or two, simply because technology can now do so many things that we used to rely on human labor for. And the classic bargain for the past 200 years is I will offer my labor to the economy, and I'll get a decent wage as a result. And that bargain has held up very, very well. The thing that keeps me up at night is I think that bargain is changing, and I think it's changing quickly, and we're not aware enough of it.
I alluded to that before. There is a certain fear about the future developments here. And you know, you alluded to, I think it was Nick Ludd in England. They were fighting in 1811 against the textile industry. In Germany, we have a book here, Gerhard Hauptmann, The Weavers, who were storming the invention there. Do you understand that fear?
I absolutely understand that fear. I share that fear because, as I say, I honestly believe in my lifetime we're going to get to an economy that does not need anything like the amount of human labor that it does now. So that changes the classic bargain. The question is, what should we do about that? And my ground rule is, let's not try to stop or channel technological progress so that even with the best of intentions, even if we say our goal here is to make sure that no worker is harmed by this technological progress, we're going to get terrible outcomes if we do that. For example, I could imagine someone taking a look at, let's say you had to ask permission before you innovated. And so Etsy submitted its business plan to someone and said, this is what we want to do. I could imagine a well-meaning bureaucrat saying, you want to let people make things out of their home and sell them? We can't protect labor standards. We can't protect child labor. We have no idea what's going on, and it might hurt people who make things for a living now, so no, we're not going to allow this. Making innovators seek permission is a deeply terrible idea, and trying to channel the course of tech progress or trying to halt it if we don't like it is a bad idea. Let's deal with the consequences.
Now, you are the beneficiaries in the United States from a lot of innovation, from a lot of entrepreneurship, and if we take the three largest Amazon, Facebook, and Google, they could buy up the largest 30 companies that as they are listed in the stock exchange. After World War II, we had one company making it to the top 30 that was created. One. So overall, we have a hard time fostering a startup culture which is doing something like you've experienced.
Yeah.
Any idea on how we could?
I do think that there is this cultural reluctance to fail publicly, and I think that probably gets in the way. I do also think that the regulatory regime, as I've looked at it in Europe, impedes innovation and too often seeks to approve different kinds of innovation or different kind of change. I think that's just a deeply bad idea. I think, for example, I understand the motivation behind the right to be forgotten law in Europe. I think it's just a terrible idea.
Yeah, we have a few other ones.
You know, we could go down the list, but one of the things we notice back home, I don't mean to sound like a cheerleader for America, because one of the things we clearly notice is that entrepreneurship is on the decline in America. It's been heading down for a long time, and we get distracted by all these technology successes. The general story is not a happy story. Why is that? I think our immigration policies are ridiculous. I think we are, with the best of intentions, we're putting a lot of regulation in place, and I think that's hurting us like it's probably hurting some things in Europe.
If I go in our history, if in the old days the Hamburg merchant was failing, they had two ways. They could go to America, or they could kill themselves. So that's.
I'd like to expand that choice set a little bit, right? Can we open up for questions? We only have, we don't have too much time left.
Few questions, please. Annette.
Hello, my name is Annette Ayres. I'm a professor at INSEAD on digital transformation, and I'm also in the board of a few companies who are in the midst of this digital transformation.
And formerly a McKinsey partner.
And formerly McKinsey partner. My question is a bit, if you look at the development, the machines are not going to be more effective than us, but very soon they will also take better decisions than we can.
No, that already happened.
Exactly. So my question is, what will be the value added of the human being in 10 years' time?
We have no answer to that question. Anyone who tells you they know what the balance between mind and machine is 10 years from now is either lying to you or lying to themselves. But one thing we need to do is be more clear-sighted, be more astute about what humanity is actually good at. Because most of us walk around with this idea that one thing that we do better is you hear judgment, you hear intuition, you hear decision-making in a complex environment. It's just dead flat wrong. It's remarkable how easy it is to get an algorithm that outperforms even highly trained, well-educated human experts. I cannot wait for an automated physician, for an automated diagnosis of anything that's wrong with me. The question then becomes, those technologies have some failure modes as well. How do we combine them with humanity's ability to be flexible and to exercise, because we do have some judgment. But this naive idea that I hear very often, that it's our judgment or our intuition that is kind of ineffably human and much better than the machines, it's just wrong.
So Moore's law doesn't apply?
Moore's law does not apply to us, sadly. We evolve at a much slower.
One-year-old child does more than any supercomputer can ever do.
I mean, I think we're still going to have human plumbers in 10 years, because even with progress in robotics, we're not going to be able to do that. But human doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists, that's a lot tougher.
There's a question over there.
Yeah, hi. Hey, Andy.
Hey, David.
You know I'm a fellow traveler, and I agree with a lot of your thinking for a long time. But I'm just, and forgive the question, I will give two caveats, because I'm not an economist, and this question probably sounds like
Andy,
a climate change denier in another dialogue. But I'm sure you've thought about this, and I think it's a question you need to answer in the light of points you're making. The unemployment rate has been dropping in the United States very substantially lately. How do you square that with what you're arguing, if it's necessary to square it at all, in your view?
No, it's really important to square it, and thank you for that jerk question, because it's actually a really, really important one. As long as we've had technology, starting, as you say, 200 years ago, allegedly smart people have been in front of you saying, the era of mass technological unemployment is right around the corner. And including one of my intellectual heroes, John Maynard Keynes, said it very clearly in 1930. All those people have been wrong. In other words, as technology has advanced, we have had this almost insatiable demand for labor. So average wages have gone up, jobs have gone up, the standard of living for the average worker has gone up. David, your question is, how can we be so sure things are different this time? It's absolutely the right question. The reason I have some confidence that things are different this time is absolutely the evidence. The median American family is worse off now than they were in the late 1990s. Even as jobs are coming back in America, wages are not moving at all, a complete flat line in wages. And the reason the unemployment rate is going down is because fewer people are even looking for work. So even in kind of the happy statistics that I see in 2014 in America, there's a really clear dark underside for that. And I think that technology is the main reason why. When you look at the past 30 years, the curves, the lines are finally starting to bend, and unless we intervene, they're going to continue to diverge from each other, and the average worker, I believe, is going to continue to face some real pressure. Some of my colleagues are really worried about the singularity and really worried about what happens when we have super powerful artificial intelligence. Let me tell you something. If things continue on the same trajectory they are now, the people are going to rise up way before the machines do.
Another question here. There are two more. Yes.
Thank you. Having had read your book, and I would agree with saying it's probably the best I read, and that is in the last 18 months you've published more, 50 plus, so at least I have a measure. But all you're saying in the book and today, actually Larry Summers' hypotheses of secular stagnation should be out. I will be interested in having your comments to that.
Yeah, so luckily Larry had some kind things to say about the book. We've talked with him a lot about this. And the point that he's making is that we're in these very strange economic times that we're unfamiliar with, where we have extraordinarily low interest rates. We have extraordinarily high corporate profits, so you have a hard time saying that companies are poor these days. That's not the case. We have really low business investment. Companies are not spending money on tons of things. And we have like very, very slow, weird economic growth and almost no inflation, probably deflation. This is a strange constellation of events. There's a lot of reason to be uncomfortable with that. What Larry says is one of the things that could be going on is technological progress is allowing companies to turn out more and more without building more factories. They can get more out of their existing factory. One of the things that I think is also going on is that tech progress is driving down the price that we pay for a lot of things. I'm not saying that's the only cause of deflation. I think it might be one factor out there. The challenge is if we really are in this period of secular stagnation, getting out of it is quite difficult to do. I completely agree with Larry. Like, let's spend a lot of money on infrastructure. It makes no sense to me that in this world, I'm embarrassed as an American every time I fly into JFK as an airport. Why do we have third world infrastructure in a country that's leading the technology revolution? It's ridiculous.
And we have...
Could you please make this an excellent question, because it's the last one of the day.
This is going to be the best one of the day. It's going to be so good. Hi, Jason Rapp from Science Inc. in LA. This is great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you expand more on your point about winner take all and technology? Because it seems like for social networks, Facebook, Instagram, even for Amazon, and you could make an argument for Google that it was not technology, but rather the network effects and the expansiveness of the node network that made the winner-take-all possible.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't mean to lay everything right at the door of technology. Those network effects were impossible before our current era of technology. These businesses couldn't exist. We find ourselves in this new world where right now, billions of people have access to a connected, powerful device. In the next 5 or 10 years, I mean this seriously, for the first time in history, a majority of the world's population is going to have access to a powerful, connected device. That to me is the best economic news on the planet. That's going to be amazing. I do think, though, that what it's going to accentuate is these winner-take-all dynamics. So while I'm incredibly optimistic, as I look at that average worker, increasingly anywhere in the world, who has average skills and abilities and education, even in this world of amazing technology and all the benefits, I worry about the economic prospects for that worker. I think our hard work as entrepreneurs should be like what we're hearing from Uber and Etsy and some of these great companies today. What can I do as an entrepreneur to put some labor back into this system? I think that's a great thing for this audience to concentrate on, but all of us as citizens and people who influence policy choices, let's consider that possibility of this world, future world, a realistic one, and let's act as citizens and voters accordingly. The last sentence in our book is one that I find myself repeating all the time, because I get accused of fatalism once in a while. So let me try to wind up by saying the last sentence of our book: technology is not destiny. We shape our destiny.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well done.